The death toll has climbed to 41, with more than 200 people injured after the suicide bomb attacks on Istanbul's Ataturk International Airport yesterday. 3 gunmen opened fire on travellers before blowing themselves up, all the hallmarks of an ISIS attack. Otago University international relations expert Robert Patman joins me now. Robert, morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
It does have all the hallmarks of an ISIS attack. Is it surprising they haven't yet claimed responsibility?
No, there's been about 6 attacks in Turkey this year, Paul, and ISIS has not always claimed responsibility for some of the attacks it was responsible for. And one of the reasons is that Turkey has been an important passageway for ISIS and its connection with Europe, channeling fighters or personnel into Europe and receiving them. So it doesn't always want to advertise that it's actually responsible for the bombings, but clearly it's been very angry by Turkey's role in the war against ISIS.
And of course the general war against terrorism, and I said yesterday when we were covering this, because obviously it was just playing out at this time yesterday, I said, you know, we have to be aware that Turkey is shouldering a huge burden in terms of the war on terrorism domestically. They have to sell that to their people. The US yesterday said this attack was heinous and they are steadfast in their support for Turkey. Does Turkey need more credit for shouldering as much of this fight as it is?
I think a lot of people don't realise, and I think at this point takes us to this realisation, that Turkey actually is hosting 2.5 million refugees who fled across the border into Turkey from Syria. Of course, Turkey and Syria share a 500-mile border, and in that sense, Turkey is at the sharp end of the Syrian civil war.
They are in the trenches. I mean, they're a NATO member. Yeah. They're very much part of the coalition against terror, against ISIS, but they are right there on the front line.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that Turkey's role in the civil war, the Syrians in fighting ISIS, is complicated by the fact that it has other enemies which it goes after in the war in Syria. In particular, the Syrian Kurds, which it targets. It sees the Syrian Kurds as an extension of the PKK, which is the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which is fighting for autonomy within Turkey. And that's caused some tension between Turkey and the United States.
All right. The Turkish president yesterday said that this most recent attack here should serve as a turning point in the global fight against militant groups. What does he, because of course we have seen many attacks like this, what does he mean specifically by that?
He may be signalling that he's prepared to align himself more closely with the United States. He's always been, at least seen through American eyes, semi-detached in the way he's gone after ISIS. And he said quite publicly and clearly that his major enemy were the Syrian Kurds first and ISIS second. Whereas I think there may be a reordering of those priorities because ISIS has been involved in a number of shocking atrocities this year in Turkey, may have forced the Turkish leadership to reassess that listing of priorities.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because how is this playing out domestically for the government of Turkey? Because obviously people will be looking at this and saying, we have very clearly made ourselves a target. We are very clearly being targeted.
I think many Turks take the view they have no choice but to confront the insurgency in their country. And that's probably influenced the fact that the Turkish government has always gone after the Syrian Kurds first and then ISIS second. There's a switch in priorities, so I think it's a question of watching this space, Paul. It depends to what extent I think that President Erdogan is seen as taking his eye off the ball. That is to say, if he's focusing too much on ISIS at the expense of what they see as the domestic threat, which is linked to the war in Syria.
All right, I thank you so much for the analysis, Robert Patman, Otago University international relations expert. And here's why this is so interesting here, because they are shouldering a huge, proportionally, the biggest burden anyone is shouldering on the war on terror, proportionally. And when you look at that, you say, well, why is that so interesting? It's interesting because it is such a tourist hub, because it is a first world country with very, very dodgy, bloody neighbours. Because the airport that was attacked yesterday is the 3rd busiest and biggest airport in Europe. So it is very much first world, but it is planted right there on the 3rd world.